It began with a virus, but what spread faster was fear. Lockdowns, masks, numbers on screens, a theater of control dressed as medicine. This is the story they don't want told. Wake TF up. The lockdown regime. The first lockdowns were shock. The lockdown regime that followed was endurance. What began as temporary measures hardened into long months of confinement, repeated cycles of restriction, and a new normal defined by obedience. Citizens were told that survival depended on compliance, that freedom was dangerous, that human contact was a threat. The lockdown regime was not just a measure, it was a system. It reshaped society, eroded sovereignty, and inflicted wounds that will not heal. Family businesses collapsed under the weight of closure. Shops, cafes, pubs, and restaurants, many built over generations, were shuttered indefinitely. Owners who had poured their lives into their work watched livelihoods disintegrate. Government support schemes offered temporary relief, but they were not salvation. They created dependency, not resilience. Sovereignty was eroded as communities that had thrived on independence were reduced to waiting for state handouts. The lockdown regime destroyed the fabric of local economies, transferring wealth and power upwards to corporate giants. Children grew up in isolation. Schools closed, playgrounds emptied, friendships suspended. Education was reduced to screens, lessons delivered through digital platforms, interaction stripped of humanity. Children were told to fear contact, to avoid play, to accept isolation as normal. The lockdown regime reshaped childhood, replacing laughter with silence, community with solitude, growth with confinement. The scars will last. A generation was taught that obedience was virtue, that isolation was safety, that fear was normal. Elders died unseen. Care homes became prisons, families barred from visiting, parents left to fade in solitude. The lockdown regime denied dignity to those who had lived long lives. Final days were spent without touch, without comfort, without family. Funerals were forbidden, mourning criminalist, respect stripped away. The justification was always the same: the world's first pandemic. The phrase was used to deny humanity, to enforce isolation, to strip dignity. The lockdown regime inflicted wounds not just on bodies, but on souls. The lockdown regime magnified inequality. Citizens confined in cramped flats suffered isolation and despair, while elites lived freely in spacious homes, often breaking their own rules. Politicians were exposed attending parties, traveling, and gathering, while ordinary citizens were fined for visiting loved ones. The hypocrisy was glaring. Restrictions for the people, freedom for the powerful. The lockdown regime revealed inequality in stark relief, corroding trust and magnifying anger. The lockdown regime also reshaped society's relationship with the state. Citizens were told that freedom was conditional, that rights could be suspended, that obedience was necessary. Police were given powers to fine, to arrest, to enforce decrees. Citizens who resisted were criminalized. The lockdown regime normalized surveillance, control, and punishment. Sovereignty was eroded. The relationship between citizen and state was rewritten. Obedience in exchange for survival. The lockdown regime created rituals of obedience. Citizens were told to clap for carers, to wear masks, to follow arrows in shops, to queue at distances. These rituals were presented as unity, but they were conditioning. They turned obedience into habit, compliance into reflex, conformity into virtue. The lockdown regime embedded obedience into daily life, normalizing control through ritual. The lockdown regime silenced dissent. Citizens who questioned restrictions were dismissed, ridiculed, or censored. Scientists who raised concerns were ignored. Doctors who spoke of misused statistics were silenced. The regime tolerated no contradiction. It was not just about confinement, it was about conformity. The lockdown regime ensured that every voice echoed the same message: obey, comply, conform. The lockdown regime fractured communities. Families were separated, neighbors isolated, friendships suspended. Citizens were told to fear gatherings, to avoid contact, to accept solitude. Communities that had thrived on connection were reduced to silence. The lockdown regime created suspicion, turning society against itself. Citizens were conditioned to fear not just the virus, but each other. The regime was not just physical, it was psychological. The lockdown regime was the seventh act of the Corona Chronicle. It was the moment when temporary measures became permanent, when confinement became system, when society was reshaped by decree. It was the moment when family businesses collapsed, children grew up in isolation, elders died unseen, and sovereignty was eroded. It was the moment when the phrase "world's first pandemic" was used not just to justify restrictions, but to normalize control itself. The lockdown regime was relentless. It spoke in closures, in fines, in rituals. It silenced dissent, magnified inequality, and reshaped society. It turned freedom into danger, contact into threat, obedience into virtue. It was not just about health, it was about control. The lockdown regime stripped dignity, fractured communities, and eroded sovereignty. And it did so under the banner of the world's first pandemic, a phrase that carried terror, obedience, and conformity in equal measure. The double standards. The lockdown regime demanded obedience from the people, but those who imposed the rules often lived outside them. Ordinary citizens were fined for visiting loved ones, criminalists for mourning, punished for gathering. Meanwhile, politicians and elites were exposed attending parties, traveling freely, and laughing at the very restrictions they enforced. The double standards were not hidden, they were flaunted. They revealed the truth. The rules were for control, not for health. In the United Kingdom, the hypocrisy was stark. Citizens were told they could not gather, could not visit family, could not hold funerals. Police fined individuals for sitting on park benches, for traveling to see parents, for meeting friends. Yet behind closed doors, politicians gathered in offices, held parties, and drank together. Photographs and reports later exposed the gatherings. The same leaders who stood at podiums demanding obedience were laughing, drinking, and breaking their own decrees. The double standards corroded trust, magnified anger, and revealed the regime for what it was: control for the people, freedom for the powerful. In other nations, the hypocrisy was the same. Leaders traveled while citizens were confined. Officials gathered while families were separated. Restrictions were enforced with fines and arrests, yet elites lived without consequence. The double standards were global. They revealed that the lockdown regime was not about health, it was about obedience. The rules were imposed on the people, but ignored by those who imposed them. The double standards silenced grief. Families who lost loved ones were denied funerals, told they could not gather, criminalized for mourning. Parents died alone, elders faded in solitude, families were stripped of dignity. Yet politicians gathered freely, laughed together, and celebrated. The hypocrisy was unbearable. Citizens were told to obey in the name of health, while leaders broke the rules in the name of convenience. The double standards revealed contempt for the people. The double standards magnified inequality. Ordinary citizens were fined, punished, and shamed. Elites were excused, protected, and celebrated. The rules were enforced with severity against the powerless, but ignored with impunity by the powerful. The hypocrisy was not accidental, it was systemic. It revealed the true purpose of the lockdown regime: control of the people, freedom for the elites. The double standards stripped away the illusion of unity, exposing division in its rawest form. The double standards also revealed the fragility of trust. Citizens had obeyed restrictions, sacrificed livelihoods, endured isolation, and accepted confinement. They had believed the slogans, trusted the briefings, and complied with decrees. But when the hypocrisy was exposed, trust collapsed. Citizens realized that obedience had been demanded under false pretense. The double standards revealed that the rules were not about health, they were about control. Trust was shattered, anger magnified, resistance seeded. The double standards were not hidden, they were exposed by leaks, photographs, and reports. Yet even when revealed, the regime continued to demand obedience. Politicians apologized, but the rules remained. Citizens were told to continue obeying, even as leaders were caught breaking their own decrees. The hypocrisy was blatant, but the regime was relentless. The double standards revealed contempt, but the machine continued to grind. The double standards were the eighth act of the Corona Chronicle. They were the moment when hypocrisy was laid bare, when trust collapsed, when anger grew. They were the moment when citizens realized that the rules were not about health, they were about control. They were the moment when the phrase "world's first pandemic" was used not just to justify restrictions, but to excuse hypocrisy. The double standards revealed the truth. The regime was not about unity, it was about division. The double standards were relentless. They spoke in parties, in gatherings, and laughter. They silenced grief, magnified inequality, and corroded trust. They revealed contempt for the people, freedom for the elites, and control for the powerless. They were not just about hypocrisy, they were about truth. The double standards stripped away the illusion of unity, exposing the regime for what it was. And they did so under the banner of the world's first pandemic, a phrase that carried terror, obedience, and hypocrisy in equal measure. The money trail. The lockdown regime demanded obedience, but behind the curtain, another machine was running. The money trail. While citizens were confined, businesses shuttered, and families stripped of dignity, billions flowed through contracts, deals, and profiteering. The world's first pandemic was not just a health crisis, it was a financial harvest. Wealth was transferred upwards, corporations enriched, political allies rewarded. The money trail revealed the true engine of the pandemic, profit. Peeped contracts, billions in the shadows. As fear spread, governments scrambled to procure personal protective equipment. Masks, gloves, gowns, and ventilators became symbols of survival. Citizens were told that shortages threatened lives, that urgent action was necessary, that billions must be spent. Contracts were signed at speed, often without scrutiny. Companies with no track record were awarded multi-million-pound deals. Political donors, friends of ministers, and shell corporations suddenly became suppliers. The money trail was not about protection, it was about profit. In the United Kingdom, the so-called VIP lane allowed politically connected firms to bypass normal procurement processes. Billions were funneled into contracts awarded without competition. Some companies delivered defective equipment, others failed to deliver at all, yet payments were made. Ordinary citizens were fined for breaking restrictions, while elites enriched themselves through contracts. The hypocrisy was glaring. The money trail revealed that the lockdown regime was not just about health, it was about wealth. Masks and compliance masks became symbols of obedience. Citizens were told to wear them in shops, on transport, in schools. The justification was always the same: the world's first pandemic. Yet behind the symbolism lay profit. Companies mass-produced masks, governments purchased billions, and contracts flowed. The money trail turned compliance into commerce. Citizens were fined for refusing masks, while corporations profited from their production. The mask was not just a symbol of obedience, it was a commodity in the money trail. Vaccine profiteering. The greatest harvest came with vaccines. Citizens were told that salvation depended on vaccination, that freedom would return only after compliance, that the world's first pandemic demanded unprecedented speed. Pharmaceutical companies were handed billions in public funds to develop vaccines. Contracts were signed in secrecy, indemnities granted, profits guaranteed. The money trail flowed directly into corporate coffers. Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca all became household names. Their profits soared, share prices rose. Executives enriched themselves. Politicians with investments benefited. Families were denied funerals. Businesses collapsed. Children grew up in isolation. Yet corporations recorded record profits. The money trail revealed the true beneficiaries of the pandemic, not citizens, but corporations. In the UK, questions were raised about political connections. Reports highlighted that Rishi Sunak's family had links to Moderna through investments. While citizens were told to obey, elites profited. The money trail was not hidden. It was exposed. Yet the regime continued to demand obedience. Citizens were told to vaccinate, to comply, to accept restrictions. The money trail revealed that the pandemic was not just about health, it was about profit. Billionaires enriched. The money trail did not stop at contracts. Billionaires across the world saw their wealth increase dramatically during the pandemic. Tech giants profited from digital dependency. Online retailers thrived as citizens were confined. Pharmaceutical companies recorded record revenues. The world's first pandemic became the greatest transfer of wealth in modern history. Ordinary citizens lost livelihoods, while billionaires gained billions. The money trail revealed the true cost of obedience. Poverty for the many, profit for the few. Hypocrisy and secrecy. The money trail was marked by hypocrisy. Citizens were told to sacrifice, to obey, to endure. Politicians spoke of solidarity, of unity, of shared struggle. Yet behind the curtain, contracts were signed in secrecy, profits guaranteed, wealth transferred. The hypocrisy was glaring. Citizens were fined for visiting loved ones, while elites enriched themselves through contracts. The money trail revealed contempt for the people. The secrecy was deliberate. Contracts were hidden, details withheld, transparency denied. Citizens were told that urgency justified secrecy, that the world's first pandemic demanded speed. Yet secrecy concealed profiteering, corruption, and inequality. The money trail was not about urgency, it was about concealment. It ensured that citizens could not see the harvest, could not question the profiteering, could not challenge the corruption. The cost to citizens, while billions flowed upwards, citizens bore the cost. Family businesses collapsed, livelihoods were destroyed, communities eroded. Citizens became dependent on government support, sovereignty eroded. Taxes will rise, debt will expand, austerity will return. The money trail ensured that the cost of the pandemic will be borne not by corporations, but by citizens. The harvest was profit for the few, debt for the many. The money trail revealed the true legacy of the pandemic, poverty disguised as protection. The global harvest, the money trail was not confined to one nation, it was global. Governments across the world signed contracts, awarded deals, and funneled billions into corporations. Pharmaceutical companies recorded profits across continents. Tech giants thrived as digital dependency spread. Online retailers expanded as citizens were confined. The world's first pandemic became a global harvest. Wealth was transferred upwards, sovereignty eroded, inequality magnified. The money trail revealed that the pandemic was not just a health crisis, it was a financial revolution. The aftermath, the money trail, will not end with the pandemic. The contracts signed, the debts incurred, the profits recorded, they will shape the future. Citizens will bear the cost for decades. Taxes will rise, services will be cut, austerity will return. Corporations will continue to profit. Elites will continue to enrich themselves. Inequality will continue to grow. The money trail revealed the true engine of the pandemic, profit, and its legacy will be poverty for the many, wealth for the few. Act X conclusion. The money trail was the 9th act of the Corona Chronicle. It was the moment when the pandemic became harvest, when contracts became profiteering, when obedience became commerce. It was the moment when billions were siphoned through PPE contracts, mask deals, and vaccine profiteering. It was the moment when the world's first pandemic became the greatest transfer of wealth in modern history. The money trail revealed the truth. The pandemic was not just about health, it was about profit. The money trail was relentless. It spoke in contracts, in profits, in secrecy. It silenced dissent, magnified inequality, and enriched elites. It turned obedience into commerce, compliance into profit, confinement into harvest. It was not just about protection, it was about wealth. The money trail stripped dignity, concealed corruption, and reshaped society. And it did so under the banner of the world's first pandemic, a phrase that carried terror, obedience, and profiteering in equal measure. This was never just about a virus. It was about ritualized obedience, the fog of substitution, and the theater of control. Every taped floor, every shifting rule, every televised number was a signal. You are being conditioned. But signals can be inverted. We can burn away the fog, expose the contradictions, and reclaim sovereignty. The coronavirus spectacle is not the end, it is the precedent. Carry this ledger forward, copy it, teach it, and refuse dilution. This is Wake TF Up, Sovereign Signal. The rally point for those who refuse comfort, refuse fog, and demand truth. Sovereignty is not given, it is taken back. Wake TF Up.